Hi, this is Jim Quick, and I want to welcome you back. We are at Quick Reading session number 3, and I want to start off by congratulating you. If you made it this far, you are a very special type of individual. Not only did you invest in this program, but you're investing your time and your focus, your energy, and you are one of the few who do versus the many who talk. And I believe you're going to experience rewards in this area far, far faster than what most people will experience because of your commitment. So let's get started. In this session, we are going to go really deep, and specifically, we're going to focus on 3 areas. Okay, we're going to focus on speed, we're going to focus on comprehension, and we're really going to focus on smart reading, because really, before even speed reading, you really want to be able to read smart, read intelligently. You read with all your faculties and all your wisdom, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to do in this session is what we're going to need is you're going to need to bring with you and have ready with you your hardcover fiction book. I'm going to ask you to bring out your pen and or pencil. Bring out those post-it notes or those paper clips if you happen to have them. Those are for putting little marks in terms of where you finished reading. If you don't have a challenge writing in your book, then certainly a pen and pencil will do. And what I'd also like you to bring out is a notebook, committed notebook, because we're going to talk about this, taking notes, the power of taking notes and writing things down. Most people will go to a seminar to listen to an audio recording or read something, and they'll forget, upwards of 50% or more within the first 24 hours. And just by taking notes, will help dramatically improve that. And one of the questions that we're getting on the blog is people are reading and they're getting some good gains in speed, and they're not completely sure how it is in comprehension. And what I want to talk about today is that you can't do both at the same time. What we're prepping you for going through this method is teaching you a new set of motor skills. It's kind of like riding a bike. I don't want to show you how to ride a bike and necessarily, if that's something you're doing for the first time, and start doing advanced calculus. And so we're not going to be multitasking here. So when we're doing these speed drills, I want to make sure that you understand that these speed drills are exactly that. They're teaching your eyes to follow your finger across the page. The comprehension is secondary, and literally sometimes it's a little bit of far second. That in the beginning you're going to sacrifice a little bit of your comprehension for the speed, and then once you're used to the speed, which I'm assuming is happening more and more, as you're practicing. If you're practicing consistently, then the comprehension will grow as it comes. And people ask on the blog, that you ask me, can you really understand at that higher rate? And let me show you something, how the mind kind of decodes information. I'm going to show you this little exercise. I just want you to look at this and read it to yourself. I want you to ask yourself how amazing your brain actually is. Just read this to yourself. If you would like to read it out loud, certainly you could do that. Now, I'm willing to bet, as you're reading this, when you're at first glance, it kind of looks like that I took all these letters and I kind of put them into a little glass jar, and I shook them up and I kind of put them out there for you to look at. But as you're studying it, it's kind of interesting. When we're talking about this research study done at Cambridge University, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be in the right place, and so on. I mean, your mind is incredibly adept to figure things out, to be able to look for patterns, to be able to do things in ways that originally a lot of people didn't understand. So let me do a really quick review, and then we're going to get into today's exercises. First, we talked about, in the last session, we talked about the 5 P's, the 5 pillars of quick reading. And very quickly, no pun intended, they are a place, which is the where, talking about the physiology, which is the what, we're talking about the psychology, which is the why, we talked about the procedure, which is the how, and we talked about the practice, which is the when. And I think if you look, this doesn't just apply to speed reading, and accelerate. This could be applied towards memory. This could be applied towards any kind of success endeavor. You want to be able to monitor, where you're learning in terms of creating the optimal learning environment. which we went through, which is talking about the optimal learning environment, talking about the cool temperatures, talking about the natural lightings that's there, minimizing distractions that are in your environment, because certainly where you are learning actually definitely has an effect, and it gets actually anchored to what you're learning. They did these studies where they would take people and I remember reading about one of them where they would have somebody memorize information down below water. All right, and there would be underwater. They would have maybe some scuba gear, and they would memorize it, and they would take them out of the environment and ask them to recall it, and they would see how well they did. And then they would actually put them back in the actual environment where they actually learned the information, and their recall actually went up because what the environment itself got linked to the actual information, kind of like Pavlov. Does Pavlov ring a bell? And so this is the place. And I always like to have positive anchors for that very reason, because the anchors in your environment, the nice positive quotes, the images, the pictures of the people that make you feel good. And I'm going to go through this quickly. The physiology, because we're going to be using that a lot today. The physiology is what? Right? This is exactly what you're doing. You're sitting up straight in that visual posture. You're breathing because you want to make sure you get the oxygen in the lower half of your lungs, because that's where you're absorbing a lot of it into your bloodstream. You're getting ample enough amounts of water because your brain is 80% water, and it's so important to be well hydrated, especially because your brain is bioelectrical. You have the correct book position where you have it, where if you're sitting upright, you have it on a tilt, so you're seeing it directly the page directly, as opposed to a slant where it makes it a little bit more difficult to actually see all the words. On top of it, we talked about the psychology, and that's really the why. Because I know and this is something you want to just repeat to yourself over and over again, is all learning is state dependent. All learning is state dependent. Like before I go to learn something or to study something, I always check my state first. Again, state is a fancy word for what you're feeling right in that moment. What's the mood that you're in? And the kind of state that I like to develop is one of relaxed curiosity. Relaxing, a certain level of excitement, because the state that you're in is going to have a huge impact on the actual results that you're going to get. And I like to have a positive expectancy as well, that you're going through there with a positive outcome. And besides the actual why, we also talked about the procedure, which is the what. We talked about specifically, how you're actually doing it, the visual pacer, if you will. You're underlining the words, because we find that people that underline words using a visual pacer, have the ability to be able to read with greater focus. They spend less time regressing or going back and back skipping words. We talked about using a highlighter. We talked about using a pen or pencil, potentially your computer mouse, as you're actually reading something. That this will automatically increase, even for beginners, and I encourage you to share this with a family member, or a spouse, or a friend, or a coworker. Even if they haven't gone through this training, they'll probably increase about 20 to 20, 25, 30, 50% increase in the actual speed. Now, with proper conditioning, you could actually get those numbers up dramatically. We know that people that use their finger while they read can increase their reading speed upwards of 100 or 200 and 300%, even greater, and that's what a lot of speed reading programs are based on. And when you have that, you also want to be able to schedule everything. So it's so important to be able to really practice. You want to be able to practice, because practice, again, makes permanent. Practice makes permanent. I thought you think I was going to say practice makes perfect, but I do believe perfect practice makes perfect, if you will. And we talked about the habit of 21, right? The law of 21, doing things for 21 days helps you to break habits or be able to create new ones. We talked about the peak times when you want to be able to practice. Some people are morning people. Some people, their biorhythms are more apt to learn in the evening times. So I always encourage people to study when they're going to get the most out of it, similar to going to work out, to exercise your body. You want to be able to do it when you have the most to be able to give, because what you put into it is what you get out of it. And one of the most important things when you're doing this is based on any kind of time management, is you want to make sure you schedule it, because so many people, as we talked about in previous sessions, is they put themselves last. They'll sacrifice the things that are very, very important for things that are urgent, and sometimes we'll end up majoring in minor things, or the minor things in life are at the expense of things that are major. And this is something, the reason why I put such emphasis, and I cajole you to be able to practice, is because once you have this skill, this is something that will serve you for the rest of your life. It's literally something that you're doing that's going to help you to be able to make time. And so what we want to do here is we want to start off when I want to mark your current reading rate, And so this session is very interactive. So I'm going to ask you to take your book and open it up, and you can kind of press it open a little bit if it's a new book. Be able to make sure that it's you want to create an ideal situation for you to be able to learn, so the pages don't just kind of come together, or the binding doesn't bring it to being and be able to close the door on the books on it. Here what we want to do is you want to be able to mark the beginning spot with a pen, pencil, a post-it note, or a paper clip. All right, so I want you to pick up where you left off. Now, if it's a new book, start in the beginning. I want you to mark that with a little paper clip or a little mark in the margin. Notice where you start. And I'm going to ask you to actually read for 1 full minute using your visual pacer, or you're probably using your finger. All right, I'm going to ask you to actually use your left finger as you're practicing. And one of the questions I had submitted is you asked me, do I have to use my left hand all the time? Remember in a previous session I asked you to experiment using your left hand, because some of the research is coming out saying that your left hand, by using the cross laterals, we know that half of your brain controls the other half of your body, and the other half of your brain controls the other half of your body. That by doing that, there's also works both ways. That using one side of your body actually can help stimulate that side of the brain. And the purpose of using your left hand was the potential of possibly stimulate the right side of your brain, which is the storehouse more of imagination, of visualization, of some higher emotions. So instead of just saying the words, which is saying it verbally and linguistically, is your left brain, you're actually experiencing it, which is more your right brain coming into play. So again, I'm going to ask you to read for 60 seconds using your left hand as you read, and you're just underlining the words. And one of the questions that you posted to me was that sometimes if you're using your finger on the page, that there's this thing called friction. And as you're going faster and faster, what do you do? I'm going to recommend that you keep your finger right above the page. Okay, because as you're going faster and faster, you could actually just underline the words from like a centimeter above the page, and it actually helps you to glide through it a lot quicker without the friction. And then when I say stop, I'm going to ask you to stop and then mark the place where you ended up. So if you use post-it notes, use another post-it note to mark where you ended. Okay, and then I'm going to ask you to count the number of lines that you just read. All right, so get ready, go to your spot. Do not begin yet. We'll begin together. And go. For 60 seconds, just read how you would normally read. "30 seconds. And stop, please. Wonderful. All right, now put a little mark in the margin where you left off, and what I'd like you to do now is count the number of lines that you just read. Count the number of lines. And we'll say, for the purpose of this exercise, that it counts as a line if the words go more than halfway across the page. So you're making a little bit of a guesstimate. And I also want you to note, as you're counting the number of lines in your book right now, is how you're doing it. Because I'm willing to bet there's a very high chance that you're actually using your finger while you count. And notice that you do it naturally. I don't think anyone's looking over the pages and says, oh, 37 lines. Good. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just mark that number, whatever number that you just came up with in terms of those lines. Write that number down. And if you wanted to get, figure out what your words per minute is, you would just multiply that number by the average amount of words per line, if that makes sense. Because I had you read for 60 seconds, right? And for those 60 seconds, I had you count the number of lines you read in 1 minute. And then if you're going to multiply it by the average number of words per line, that'll give you your words per minute. And the average book has approximately 10 words per line. And so for most books that you have, you can just add a 0 to it, and that would be your words per minute. Remembering that the average person reads approximately 150 to, on the high end, around 250 words per minute. Okay? And now what I'd like you to do after you write out that number and you record it, we're going to do a little speed drill exercise, and we're going to pick up where we left off in the last session, and we're going to do the speed practice. And the speed practice is a 4-3-2-1 practice. All right, 4-3-2-1. And this is a complete conditioning process. A complete conditioning process because there's no, it's just similar to, getting results very quickly. Everyone wants to have a magic pill, and there's no such thing as a magic pill, in my opinion, for the most part. What I'm sharing with you, though, is a magic process. And it's a very natural, organic process, similar to working out, right? So you're exerting a certain amount of force or a certain amount of stress to be able to condition yourself, because your body and your mind will react, right? Just like as you're lifting weights, if you will. This is kind of like building your reading fitness. The 4-3-2-1 exercise, basically, I'm going to ask you to read for 4 minutes, count the number of lines, and you just kind of mark that space that you read in 4 minutes. And then I'm going to ask you to read that same amount of lines, the same exact lines, in 3 minutes. And then I'm going to ask you to do it in 2 minutes. And then I'm going to ask you to do it in 1 minute. And then obviously at 1 minute you have to do it 4 times faster. Not that you're actually reading that quickly, you're actually skimming, which is another different technique. But what it's going to do is when you go back to doing something more comfortable, then you're going to be stronger at it. And the metaphor I'm using here is like a baseball player kind of warming up. He or she is holding 2 or 3 bats, kind of swinging them, and then when he or she puts down and just carries 1 bat, and goes up to plate, and he or she hits the ball, it's a lot lighter in contrast, and that's the effect that we're creating here. It's the same exact effect as building muscles on your body. Let's say you go to the gym and you're working out, and that's what really a personal trainer does at a gym, right? You consider me your personal reading trainer, if you will. And this individual is there, and they are not better than you. They have a certain level of distinctions because they've done it so much with so many people to know what you're doing when you're great at what you're doing, right? So everybody has a coach, including greats like Michael Jordan. So here, what you're doing is you're exerting more force, more weight on here, and then as you're practicing, which is you're exercising every single week, what's happening is your muscles are growing, right? So if you go back to what you were doing a month previous, you're like, wow, that's easy. And same thing with your brain. As we know, your brain is neuroplastic, right? They call it neuroplasticity. It's very malleable in that by putting stress on it in terms of learning and getting it to do new things, it's making new connections and grow stronger because of it. Because with all these connections, let's say before there was a connection, as a metaphor, maybe there's just a thread, and then you do it again, there's 2 threads, and you do the exercise again as 3 threads, 4 threads, 5 threads. After a while, you have like a steel cable, and it becomes very permanent. And then the starting point really is that 21 days, and then you become literally wired for that new skill or that new knowledge or that new idea. Okay, so what we're doing is we're building your reading muscles. We're getting you to do something 2, 3, even 4 times faster than you would normally do it. So then when you going back to reading what you were doing before, all of a sudden it's a lot easier. All right. So excellent. So let's get started. We're going to start with the 4-minute exercise. And the 4-minute exercise, what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to mark the spot where you're starting off, where you just left off in your last exercise. I want you to mark that spot. And then I'm going to ask you to read using your finger for 4 minutes. Okay? For 4 minutes. And get ready. Get set. Go. Read how you normally read for 4 minutes. Make sure you breathe. Okay, you're halfway there. It's 2 minutes. Three minutes, 1 minute left. Okay, and stop. Excellent, great job. So what you just did is I asked you to read for 4 minutes straight. All right, you're using your finger, you're underlining things as you read, and I'm asking you to put a little mark in the margin where you left off. Okay, and actually it has to be a very distinct mark because what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to reread what you just did, and instead of doing it in 4 minutes, I'm going to ask you to get to that final spot where you just left off in 3 minutes. Okay, so put your post-it note or your pen mark or your paper clip there, and then after you do that, I want you to go back to where you started 4 minutes ago. You're going to go back now to where you started 4 minutes ago, and now we're going to do the speed exercise for 3 minutes.